Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our September garden talk. When did it become September? And today I'm Jan Beglinger. I'm the Master Gardener Coordinator. I'm also going to doing the program today. Oh, excuse me. Now I got a frog in my throat. So I wanted to talk today a little bit about fall garden chores and how we can help pollinators, butterflies, beneficial insects, and maybe even some of birds that come to your yard. So fall, a lot of gardeners use fall as kind of a time to catch up on those chores that maybe they didn't get to through the summer. And normally we think of fall as being cooler. I think next week will be more fall-like than it has been this week. And that can make some of those jobs more enjoyable. Other gardeners, September hits and they're just ready to clean everything up, put the garden to bed, and be done with it till next spring. So we all have our own goals and preferences as how we want our gardens to look through the year, but also through the winter. Typically, people like take every shred of dead plant material that's out in the garden, they cut it down, they haul it off, they rake off leaves. We even used to burn leaves. But if you've started to add native plants to your garden to help pollinators, beneficial insects, and you like attracting birds to your yard, maybe you're starting to see your garden as not just a pretty flower bed, but as a potential habitat. So the timing of some of our maintenance routines that we've done in the past can actually negatively impact some of those beneficial insects and pollinators and other wildlife that we want in our garden. And the first slide always wants to do this. All right, so these are some of the typical garden activities. We cut back perennials, we rake, haul off leaves, maybe you compost leaves. Once we've had a good hard frost, you take out your annuals or your vegetable garden. We remove diseased plants. Fall is a great time to make sure we do that garden sanitation. That's so important that you're not overwintering pathogens that will infect your plants next year. Removing diseased plants is something you should be doing throughout the growing season. Fall is also a time when we start to dig up our tender bulbs like our glads and our dahlias, or maybe bring your house plants in that spent the summer on vacation outside. Once those nighttime temperatures start getting around 50, you really want to bring your tropicals inside because they don't like those cooler temperatures. Later in the fall is a good time to plant those hardy spring blooming bulbs like our daffodils and tulips. So as the soil starts to cool a little bit, it's good to put them in. And of course, when you've got everything done, you should clean up your garden tools so that you're all set to go next spring. Sometimes they just get thrown back into the garage or the shed and they're still dirty in the spring when we go out to find them. And some of these things we can keep on doing, but some of what we do, maybe we need to change. And why do we want to change that? We have Bumble Bee Queens that are overwintering, our butterflies, moths, fireflies, toads, and other critters that are using our gardens as habitat. So most of the pollinators and other invertebrates spend the winter actually pretty near where they forage through the spring and summer. They're just hidden from view, and often it's amongst fallen leaves or on the ground under fallen leaves. Some will overwinter as adults, some overwinter as larvae or pupa, and except for the migrating butterflies, monarchs, of course, migrate, and so do painted ladies, if you didn't know that. Our butterflies will overwinter in one of the stages, either as an adult, like the mourning cloaks, eggs, caterpillars, or the chrysalis. And they rely on a protection of leaf layer or leaf litter to help them get through the winter. So this is where we kind of want to change some of what we do. So I just want to give you an example of the Bumble Bee Queens. Not only the bumblebees, but a lot of our native bees will hibernate in a variety of ways in our garden. They might overwinter under a wood pile or in a rock crevice or in an old rodent hole. But at the end of summer, the newly mated queen bumblebees burrow just an inch or two beneath the soil surface, and that's where they hang out for the winter. So an extra layer of leaves over them is great protection from the elements. If you didn't know, in a lot of our native bees, especially in the bumblebees, the nest actually dies out once we have cold weather, and only those new mated queens overwinter and restart their nest next year. They're not like honeybees. Another example of a insect that needs to overwinter through the winter is our Cecropia moth. So if you've never seen them, they're really a large moth. They're, I think, the largest moth found in North America. So they lay their eggs on host plants, which are a variety of hardwood trees like our oaks, cherries, beech, and even apple. So at some point in time in August or early September, that 5-inch long caterpillar seals itself into cocoon, which you can see here on the screen, and it looks a lot like a dried leaf. So 10 months later, it emerges as the moth, and that cocoon has to survive winter, predators, parasites, and maybe overzealous gardeners who are cleaning up their garden. So those are just two insect examples of why maybe we don't want to be quite as zealous about over cleaning our gardens. And then just a nice picture here. So a thorough cleanup can remove other overwintering insects and friends. So it's just important to realize that if you're taking out all that plant material, you're basically removing housing for the butterflies, the moths, the bees, birds, toads. So a yard that's been scraped clean, birds aren't going to stick around. They're going to fly on by and go somewhere where there's bird seed or native plants for them to eat. Toads are beneficial in the garden because they eat insects, snails, and slugs. And toads will dig down into loose soil to hibernate through the winter. And of course, leaf litter helps them too. Our next summer's butterflies and moths are rolling up in fallen leaves to hibernate, so they're on the ground. So when we really do a super job of cleaning up our gardens, we're actually impacting these other invertebrates and some of our vertebrates, how they survive through the winter. So there are some things that we should continue to do. Removing diseased plant material, you definitely want to get that out of your garden. It's always a good idea to remove diseased material through the season, even as you find it. But in the fall, doing a good cleanup will help you remove those overwintering plant pathogens. Now, if you compost, that's great, but unless you're really meticulous about a hot compost, I would not recommend putting in diseased plants or plants with weed seeds, because you need a really super hot compost to destroy those things. Put it in the garbage, get it out of your garden, and send it away. So there are some perennials that it's these are kind of like my typical 5 when you're in the garden. They usually have some kind of plant disease or insect problems. There's some natives and some non-natives in here. So anything that's diseased, I would say clean up, even if it's a native plant. Bearded iris gets iris bacterial leaf spot. It also has the iris root borer, so you want to clean them up. Bee balm and phlox, both native plants, but both known to be particularly susceptible to powdery mildew. So you want to cut those stalks down so the powdery mildew doesn't overwinter. Peony has a whole host of fungal diseases it can get: botrytis, powdery mildew, red spot. Hollyhocks are really prone to rust, and hollyhock weevil will attack the seeds. So you want to cut those stalks down if you're having those issues. And then, of course, you want to continue weeding through the fall. Weed, because nature abhors a vacuum. So if you have clear ground, the weeds are going to move in. And fall is actually when a lot of weeds actually germinate. If you have had a problem with sticky bed straw or garlic mustard, both those things tend to germinate in the fall. They grow about 2 inches. They stay green through the winter, and then they're ready to take off in the spring once the weather warms. So if you've had a problem with those, maybe fall isn't quite as busy for you as doing everything in the spring. So it's a good time to continue weeding and try to get ahead of next year's weed issues. You can leave plants standing. There's actually, I found this statement: perennials are more cold hardy. when their stems are left standing over the winter. I don't remember where I found that, but I know when people plant mums, the cushion mums, we actually have told people when you're putting your mums in the ground, especially later in the summer, to not cut them back in the fall, because it does make them a little bit more cold hardy. The stems actually can help hold leaves and snow around the crown of the plant, which makes them more hardy. So if you have some that kind of borderline perennials, it's a good thing to leave the stems on them through the winter. Now, ornamental and native grasses, we've always recommended, especially for those that stand up pretty nicely through the winter, is just leaving them up because they add winter interest to your garden. And some of the native grasses will also feed your birds. Seed-bearing perennials like ironweed, Joe Pye weed, goldenrod, asters, your cone flowers, even your bee balm. These are all producing seeds that our native birds that are here in the winter will eat. So they're going to feed your goldfinches, your juncos, and your native sparrows. So if you can leave those up someplace for the birds, and that's extra food for them. If you're growing wildflower meadows, the recommendation, especially if you have a larger meadow, the recommendation isn't to mow it all down at once. You have to cut it back at some point in time so that you don't get trees and shrubs growing up in it if you want to keep it an actual meadow. One recommendation I've seen is to cut a third a year. So let's say you have an acre meadow. You would cut a third of an acre this year, third of an acre next year, and a third of an acre the third year. That way you always have 2/3 of your meadow standing, and when you cut stuff up, you can actually cut up your insects and your overwintering insects, but you've got enough insects left in the other 2/3 to repopulate the other third. And then native perennials, well, our native plants have evolved with our native insects, birds, and wildlife, and they can provide winter homes for them and food for them for the winter. So you want to leave some of those perennials standing for the winter to support our beneficial insects, as many overwinter in or near the stems or in the crowns, and like in the grasses that have the tufts at the bottom. It's a good place for like your ladybugs or your bumblebees to overwinter. So if you do want to be a little bit more tidy and maybe, not have your neighbors harassing you, especially in your front yards, you can, after frost, cut the stems back with your sharp pruning shears. But what you want to do is leave 8 to 18 inches. And actually, once you get the seed heads off, after the birds have eaten the seeds, of course, and you get those top dead leaves off and you just have stalks, it kind of just blends in, and it doesn't really, it looks tidier, it looks intentional. So that is something you can do later in the fall or next spring if you're going to leave stuff standing through the winter. And then Heather Home created this great visual for us. And I just like to show it because it kind of shows the process and why are we doing this. One of the reasons we want to cut back the flower stalks and leave the stems of those hollow stem natives and the pithy stem natives is because next spring, some cavity nesting bee is going to be looking for a place to lay her eggs, and many of them will use our native plants. So next spring, they'll hollow out the pith, or they'll find a one without a center in it, and they will go down in there and they will lay their eggs, and you can see that in the first part where it says spring. And then during the summer, the plant grows up and you don't see those stalks. So, okay, but those bee larvae are in there developing. Now you can't cut stuff down next fall either, because those bee larvae need a whole year. So what I do is they just are going to break down naturally. I just cut the tops off of my cone flowers and I leave the rest. And as stuff breaks down, or as the bees hatch out, those stems will break down in your garden, and they add more organic matter and even, nutrients back into your garden. So this is one way that you can make habitat for stem nesting bees. And it's pretty easy. And if you've got like a head shears or something, the ones that you can clip along, it's very easy to go down and clip off the heads of your coneflowers. And I just let them lay on the ground and there they are, we're done. So that's pretty easy. If you're not sure what to save, I found this great resource on the North Carolina website. It's an article, and I will send that out to the Zoom folks, but they actually have a whole page that shows you which native plants to use and which have hollow stems and which have pithy stems. So it encourages you to save your Joe Pye weed and your bee bombs and your mountain mint and your coneflower and native thistles, cup plant, swamp milkweed, and also some of our shrubby, our hardwoods, our shrubs like elderberry and raspberry and staghorn sumac. If you do any pruning on those, the bees can also use those. So that was a great resource to show you what hollow or pithy stems are suitable for cavity nesting bees. So I would encourage you to check that page out. But I wanted to give you guys a visual of what I'm talking about. And this is mostly our native plants. So if you've got daylilies and hosta and iris, you know, those things, you can go in and cut those down like you usually do. With peonies, your ornamental type plants, go ahead and do what you've done with them in the past. So bee boxes, a lot of us have added bee boxes for like our mason bees or leaf cutter bees. But one thing I've been reading about as we've been doing this for a few years now is that we kind of put them up and forget about them. And without proper maintenance, it can actually do more harm than good to our native bees. One of the issues is that we get a high density of nesting spots in one place. The pictures here are of smaller bee houses, but some of them are quite large. And when you've got a lot of them congregated together, it attracts parasites. Pathogens can build up in the nest if you're not cleaning them out. And one thing I discovered the first year I was successful attracting leaf cutters is that about October, when I went out to check on them and I was going to bring the nest in to the garage for the winter, well, the chickadees and the woodpeckers had already beaten me to it, and they had eaten everybody that was in there trying to develop for next year. So then the following year I got ahead of them, and I found a piece of flashing that fit over my bee nest just perfectly, and I rubber banded it and I left it out in the weather so that they didn't hatch out early. So you do have to do some kind of protection with them. I also like this bee nest with the yellow roof because those have paper cones in them, so you can replace them annually so that they're clean and you're not getting parasites and pathogens building up in the nest boxes. So that is one thing to think about if you're adding nest boxes to your property. Also spread them around your property. Don't put them all in one spot. So now we get to the controversial section of my program. Leaves. Who thought leaves would be controversial? So I found a couple of interesting tidbits on the EPA site, and this is from 2018. So leaves and other yard debris waste take up 7.2% of the solid waste in the country, and that's about 10.5 million tons per year. Well, that's actually gone down because an original number I found was 13%. A lot of our leaves are being composted now, which is great. That's better than having them go into landfills. And if you're concerned about climate change, solid waste landfills are the United States' third largest source of methane emissions as things break down in there and methane is produced. So what do we do about those leaves? Well, there's been a real push among some pollinator organizations to leave the leaves where they fall or clean up your leaves in moderation. You can use leaves as mulch under trees, shrubs, and evergreens. However, leaves need to be raked from your lawn because a foot of leaves on your lawn is going to kill it. So this is where it gets kind of tricky. If you've got a small yard with one big tree, you probably don't have enough room to put all those leaves. In the past, we've talked about it's okay to mow leaves that are on lawn because then it breaks down the leaves and it actually helps fertilize the lawn. But if you're shredding or mowing the leaves, you could be destroying the insects that have laid eggs or who are hibernating on those leaves. So we get into this what do we do situation. And I don't have all the answers, and I think it's kind of what you can do in your yard and how much you can do. So this is some photos from the Xerces site. They just want to show you the difference between August and November where they're leaving the leaves. They even have signs that you can buy so you can let your neighbors who are wondering why the heck you haven't raked your leaves yet and put them out on the curb. But you can make designated areas where you can use leaves. Now leaves, if you think about it, the tree grows through the summer, and then it's taking up all the nutrients from the soil, and then those leaves drop to the ground. Well, they actually have a lot of nutrients in them that your plants can use. They actually also do make good mulch because they hold in moisture. They can suppress weeds growing. So maybe you can start using leaves instead of wood mulch that you have to go out and buy. You know, whatever you do with them, it is better than sending them off to the landfill. All right, and we also want to remember that our insects need habitat year round. They need flowers during the spring and summer, but they also need places to overwinter into the fall. So that's one of the reasons we want to start maybe incorporating leaves as part of our gardening habits. Things like swallowtail butterflies, clouded sulfurs, orange sulfurs, and spring azures also overwinter in the chrysalis stage in leaf litter. So if you love having swallowtails in your garden, well, where are they spending the winter? Again, if you have a lawn, you don't want a thick layer of leaves on it because that will damage the turf. A thin layer is okay. So if you're raking off your lawn, where can you put your leaves? That's kind of what you have to come up with for your own property. A couple examples here of things that do overwinter in the leaf litter. The Luna moth. I mean, I haven't seen a Luna moth maybe only once or twice in my life, but the caterpillars, they feed on the foliage of many types of trees. And once the Luna moth caterpillar reaches its full size, it spins this silk cocoon around itself. And you can see it looks like a little chunk of leaf. So it uses leaves with its silk and it spins it around, and then it transforms into the pupa. So this is where it stays. Now, Luna moths are interesting because they can do 2 weeks as a pupa and then come out as a Luna moth. Or if the conditions require it, the temperatures are telling them, no, stay in your cocoon for a while, they will overwinter in this state and the cocoon will fall to the ground, and there they are amongst the leaves. So there it's camouflaged and protected through the winter, when it comes out in the spring. Now, the Promethea silk moth is a little bit different because it pupates also by pulling leaves around it with silk, but it strengthens the petiole of that leaf so the leaf doesn't fall off in the winter. And once the leaves fall off your trees, you might actually be lucky enough to see this cocoon or this pupa out in your yard. So the leaf stays attached through the winter, and then in the spring, you know, this beautiful moth does emerge. So those are just 2 examples of some of our larger moths that do need to overwinter using leaves. So one common question is, well, if I leave all the leaves in my garden, are my plants going to come up through it in the spring? Yes and no. So it really does depend on the plants. A light layer of leaves is fine. So maybe 2 inches is, you know, for most plants. But a thick layer of leaves can actually be detrimental. It can hold on too much moisture. It doesn't let oxygen down into it. It could potentially damage plants that are down there, make them more susceptible to rot and other fungal diseases. And if you have too many leaves in the garden, chances are you're going to end up with mice or vole damage in your garden because it gives them cover for the winter to dig under. So if you can, you want to redistribute whole leaves to portions of your property if you have space that allows it. So it's the whole leaves that provide insulation for insects that hibernate below ground. And again, just be aware that shredding leaves can destroy any insects. You kind of have to gauge this for your own garden and decide what works for you. Now I've got the small flower in bloom here is a hepatica. That is a woodland shade plant, and it comes up quite well through my thin layer of leaves that fall on it. The other side was golden Alexanders. I think they're on the edge of a crabapple I have, and you can see some other leaves blew in, and they do okay, but I didn't get a really thick layer of leaves there. So, you know, it's maybe an inch or, like I said, an inch or 2. So they did just fine. Now you can also think about where, if you're growing native plants, where did your native plants originate from? Are they, if you have a shade garden, are they woodland plants? Because woodland plants quite easily get through the spring and come up through the leaves because they live in a forested area. So that's part of their life process. So yes, if you have May apples growing, you can let leaves fall on them. So sometimes when deciding where to put your leaves, it can help, what are you growing and what kind of natural setting did they evolve with, along with the ultimate depth of the layer. So I think woodland species are going to be a lot more happy with leaves over them than, say, prairie species or maybe your coneflowers or something like that. You can, on the other side of the screen here, we have tulips. So I know a lot of people with their bulbs and things are concerned the leaves don't come up through it. So what I do is I just go around in the spring and I have a little rake with me. It's not very wide. And if I see some of the bulbs are having a hard time coming up through an extra layer of leaves, I just gently rake the leaves away from those bulbs. Sometimes tulip leaves get caught up in leaves and I just go through and pull them off. So, it's not that much extra work. It's a lot less work than raking leaves. So that's what I do. Shrubs that are used to growing in the woods, they can actually tolerate more leaves too. So you can use leaves under your shrubs just as another place to put them. So you really have to figure out what's going to work for your garden. It might take some trial and error, some experimentation. And then I also wanted to mention, because I know a lot of places we've got more tick populations, and of course, leaves are very wet. There's high humidity, so it can also be a place where ticks might harbor through the winter. So we have to keep that in mind, but I don't want to deter people from going out. I always say, if you have ticks in your area, you should be protecting yourself regardless of what you're doing in the garden. So you should always use your tick protection. Okay, so we're through the leaves. If there's questions, I'll take them at the end. But fall is also a great time to plant. You can take advantage of the plant sales that are going on, and also the cool fall temperatures and the warmer soil temperatures. So plants will keep growing, the roots will keep growing until the ground freezes, basically. Now, I kind of have my own personal rule of thumb for fall planting. I like to have everything in the ground by the end of September. I just want to make sure my plants have a good at least 6 weeks before we have a hard frost. And I don't want to be surprised by any cold October, early November weather. I just like to have them all in the ground by the end of September. I figure that gives them enough time to get settled in. And if you are adding new things, once we've had a hard frost, then you can use some of those leaves to mulch your plants. You don't want to cover the crowns too much, but you can mulch then so you don't have the heaving. Also, if you are buying sale plants, you want to really look them over and make sure that you're not bringing home diseases or insects with you. You don't want to bring home future problems. So don't think you can save the plant because it's a couple of dollars. Just save yourself some headaches and look for healthy plants, which you should do whenever you go out plant shopping. The fall is a great time to plant bulbs. I love daffodils in the spring. They're one of my favorite plants. So I was trying to come up with some native bulbs that you can plant, and really the only one I could think of was Camassia. Now I happen to love Camassia, and the photo here is of the white strain, the Alba. Usually they're a pretty blue or kind of a purplish blue. They are native to the Northwest. There is one species that's native to the East Coast, and it is called wild hyacinth or Atlantic camas. It doesn't get as large as the Northwestern ones, and it is harder to find. And the bulbs are usually shipped, I think, in August. But the Camassias you can find in bulb catalogs, just like your daffodils and tulips. For me, in my garden, they're a great bridge between spring perennials and the summer perennials because they start blooming in May, mid-May, and they go into June, depending on the species. But, and the bumblebees love them. My patches of Camassia are so busy with bumblebees. So for me, it's good for them because it's kind of my difficult period between spring stuff ending and before the summer stuff really gets going on. So fall is a great time to plant bulbs. And if you've never tried Camassia, I would encourage you to. They like, they appreciate moist, fertile soil, a little on the acidic side, but I have neutral soils and they do just fine. They like full sun, but they'll take part shade, and they will take more moisture than most of our other bulbs will. They're also deer resistant, so you can plant them in meadows, open woodlands, plant them in a group so that they're quite showy and it's easier for the bees to find them. Fall is also a good time to start planning for next year. Do you want to plant a native tree? How about an early spring blooming tree, which are great for the bees? Just think, one tree with flowers has a lot more flowers on it than a small pollinator garden, which you can also add. Don't, small is also good, but you could plan for a pollinator garden or a monarch way station. Maybe you need to add more milkweed to your yard if you want to see monarch butterflies. Adding native plants to your existing yard and garden is also great to think about what you're going to do next spring. If you want to start a new bed, you can use cardboard to kill the weeds and grass underneath it. Or you can put a foot pile of leaves that you don't know what to do with. And by spring, you'll have killed the lawn underneath it, and you'll have some nice organic matter that you can plant new plants into. So that's planning for next year. It's always a good option for fall. Protecting your plants from the deer. Even our native plants need protection, especially small trees and shrubs. Some things are more deer resistant, but I tell people it depends on where you are, and it can change year to year. It can depend on how bad the winter is. Things that the deer don't eat in my yard, they might eat in your yard. It's changed state to state. So there are lists of resistant plants, but deer are unpredictable, and young deer are always prone to try things that maybe mama deer didn't eat because they're off by their own sometimes. So you just never know. If you are going to fence around your trees, I highly recommend you use sturdy stakes. And also deer repellent, because in the winter they will push up against the fences to get to that apple tree or maple tree or oak tree or whatever you planted. So you really do want a reinforced posts on there, and you want it far enough away that they can't just reach over the fence and grab your plant anyway. So you want it tall enough and you want it wide enough. And you're going to have to leave fences up for a couple of years until the tree has outgrown where the deer can do damage to them. Putting up chicken wire or some kind of fencing around the tree also will help protect them against hungry rabbits in the winter. So I've gone to fencing almost all of my trees and shrubs now when they're small, just because I don't know if the deer are going to get them or if the darn rabbits are going to use them as a snack in the winter. We still have hummingbirds around. If you've been feeding hummingbirds in the fall, once my hummingbirds are gone, I like to give all my hummingbird feeders a good disinfecting with a bleach solution. Basically, I fill up the sink with cool or lukewarm water and then add some bleach, and then I let them soak. And then I give them a good scrubbing. You don't want any of that black fungus left on them. You want to make sure you clean the feeding ports. They have little brushes, or you can use pipe cleaners. And then you want to give them a good rinse and then let them air dry. And then you can put them away. And then next year, May 1st, you're all set to put them out again. I like the hummingbird feeders that you can take apart completely, like in the photo here. And then that way you can scrub them through the season. Just some tips. If your hummingbird solution should always be clear. If you even start to see a hint of cloudiness, take it down, clean your feeders, because you've got fungus or yeast or something going on in there, and that's not good for the birds. So you always want to make sure your solution's clean and your feeders are clean. But that's one of my fall chores that I do, is to clean my hummingbird feeders. It's also a good time to clean out birdhouses. If you haven't been keeping up with them, or you're afraid to disturb the birds while they're nesting, now's a good time. I have a dandelion weeder thing with a long handle on it that I can put in there and kind of flip the stuff out, because sometimes the mice decide they're going to live in there too. I would wait until we have a hard frost before you remove wasp nests, because sometimes you know, it's a great place for the wasps to build their nests. So I just leave them till it's cold and then I can take those out. Now, if your feeders are hanging like these wren houses, you can disinfect them. You can just dip them in a 5-gallon bucket of some water with bleach in it, scrub them up, make them all nice and clean for spring. If they're on a post or something, you could take a squirt bottle with a 10% Clorox solution and then leave the door open till it's dry. Now, I leave my birdhouses out for the winter because the chickadees, bluebirds, even the downy woodpeckers will roost in them through the winter. So I do like to clean them out so they're clean for them for the winter. If you do leave them out like that, you're probably going to have to check on them again in the spring because the white-footed mice like to also build their winter homes and birdhouses because it's a nice, cozy place to spend the winter. But that is one thing you can do with your birdhouses now. And actually now is a good time to start at least putting out some of your bird feeders. Our birds that are here year round are actually starting to set up kind of their winter schedule of whose yard they're going to visit. So if you start putting out your sunflower feeders now, they'll go, oh yeah, she puts out a nice buffet for us every winter. So now is a good time to do that. You know, clean up your feeders or clean them now, get them ready for winter. Maybe put one out just so that birds know that you're going to be feeding them. What I find is that I'm now using mainly the black oil sunflower seed. Most of our birds will eat that. It's got a thin enough hull that a lot of the smaller birds can even take that hull off. If hulls are too messy for you, you can buy the hearts. They're more expensive, but then you don't have the mess. One other thing to consider putting out in the winter for the birds is fresh water. So if you have a heated bird bath, or you can just buy an outdoor water bowl like they have for the dogs that plug in. If you leave those filled right up to the top, and I just take a wire brush and scratch up the top for it so the birds can hang on to it a little better. If you plug that in outside for the winter, if you've got an outside outlet, it gives them fresh water year round. I really wasn't ready for this photo, but this is where we're headed with our fall cleanup activities. So can we let go of some of those excessive fall activities, those cleaning up? If you want to see more life in your garden, then consider leaving the leaves, let your native plants stand through the winter. This can be more challenging than you think. The desire to tidy up the yard, I think, is pretty strong, especially if everybody in your neighborhood is doing it. But by leaving that dead material, it's actually one of the easiest things you can do to promote more biodiversity in your yard. And we also start to need to understand the role that plant material plays. These native plants have co-evolved with our native insects. So how does leaving them up through the winter help those beneficial insects that we're trying to bring into our gardens? If you leave it, will they come? Hopefully next spring, you'll see more bees, butterflies, and birds in your garden. And then again, the resources, the folks live have the handout, and I'll be mailing this out to everybody with the links on them so you can go look for more information. If you want more information on nesting and overwintering habitat, that Xerces article is excellent. And then this is the provide nesting habitat for native bees through plant stems in your garden. That's the one that shows you the different pithy and hollow native plant stems that you can leave. And then as always, our Master Gardener is open year round. They're here Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to noon. You can email, you can call, you can pop in. Hey, if you need some fall plants, we have our plant sale coming up September 16th. It's 10 to 1. We'll have our perennials and house plants. At the fall gala, the Master Gardeners also create fresh flower arrangements for sale. We start at 10, and we also have our basket auction in this room along with our gently used book sale. If you do need your soil pH tested, we do free pH testing at the gala. And we do have 3 more garden talks to get us through the year. October 5th is Pick Your Poison. November 2nd, we're going to talk about winter seed sowing. And December 7th, garden planning and organization.